Yeah, Jason Weigandt here, the infield of Daytona International Speedway, which Ricky Carmichael once famously said this is where the series begins. Statistically, factually, that's not actually true, but it does seem like big things tend to happen when the motorcycle community gets to get together around Bike Week, have beautiful weather like this, and ride their motorcycles. It's a really fun time. And we actually did have a series that did kind of begin this week, but it's not Monster Energy AMA Supercross. We finally have details on what we knew was coming, which was an FIM World Supercross Championship. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of how we got here and try to make some predictions on where this is going, although it's very early stages. Do want to send a shout out to Anti-Gravity Batteries, who's going to back my videos now. Anti-Gravity Batteries is a lot of lithium-ion battery companies out there. They really pride themselves on being, for the high end, a little bit extra power, a little bit extra juice. The battery they sent me for my Yamaha, apparently I could jumpstart a truck with the battery that's in the bike, but it's still very lightweight. And Anti-Gravity Batteries also used by the Monster Energy Star Racing Yamaha team, and you know they obsess over scraping every last ounce out of their motorcycles, so you know that anti-gravity batteries are also light. Maybe not actually anti-gravity, but darn close. So thanks to them for jumping on board with their videos. More on that in the future. So let's talk about World Supercross. A real quick history of how we got here. There was a World Supercross Championship sanctioned by the FIM back in the 90s, kind of off-season time. They took a bunch of the big international races and made it a points-paying series, and a lot of the factory riders did participate. I think Damon Huffman or Jeff Emig was a champ one time, and then Mike LaRocca was a champ another. They even had a race in the United States at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena one year that was won by Ezra Lusk. I think that was 1999. And that series went away. It didn't, I guess, get traction like they had hoped. And then it came back because it got ensnared in this, a previous AMA regime, not the people that are at the AMA anymore. Supercross had been in this meteoric growth phase from the mid-90s into the early 2000s, and the AMA's deal with the existing promoters was up, the contract was up, and the AMA decided to go shopping and move to another promoting group and kind of say like, hey, thanks for growing this series massively, we'll take it from here. Well, the existing promoters weren't gonna just take that, so they pulled a brilliant end around and they went to the FIM and said, hey, could you sanction our series? We'll make it a world championship. And they even threw in 2 races in December in Europe in the early stages. Eventually they became 2 races in Canada, then 1 race in Canada, then every race in the United States, but it still counted as the FIM World Championship. Now, a lot of people wonder what difference does it make if you're AMA and FIM? I can define it this simply. Those are the sanctioning bodies that the manufacturers and the factory teams have decided to pursue championships in. If you're not AMA or you're not FIM, there's a good chance that the manufacturers are not going to be interested. One-off races here and there do happen without sanctioning, but pursuing a title, which is where the majority of their budget and effort go to, it's gonna be AMA and FIM. So when AMA tried to leave Supercross and figured we have the power, we are the sanctioning body, the teams will race with us, Supercross going to the FIM and being sanctioned by them, it was basically checkmate. And the AMA came back and said, you know what, on second thought, let's come back together. Sorry about that. And that's how we ended up with both AMA and FIM sanctioning for about 20 years. Probably confused as how that happened, but that's how it happened. That contract with the FIM finally ran out at the end of 2021, and Feld Entertainment, who produces Supercross, chose not to renew. It is back to an AMA-only series in Supercross, and everyone knew at that moment that the FIM was probably going to try to build its own World Supercross Championship again. As soon as the FIM announced they wouldn't be back with Feld, they said they would be taking bids on promoters to do a World Supercross series. Now, there's the chance that someone out of nowhere that no one in the industry had ever heard of could maybe try to swoop in and get it and put in a bid. But I think a lot of people thought of the big international races that already exist as maybe being players in this, maybe the people that put on the Paris Supercross or the AUS-X Open in Australia. And indeed, it was the folks behind the AUS-X Open in Australia that put a plan together. I know those folks well, Adam Bailey and Ryan Sanderson. I got to work for them and announced some television at the 2019 version of that event. They've put together quite a program. They have Tony Cochran, who apparently, I don't know much about Australian V8 supercars, but I know it's a very successful racing series over there. They partnered with him. And then this week, the news finally came that they have a capital backer, which is gonna pump a lot of money into this series. And here's why that is key. The most important thing you have to understand about how this works is, I know that we think that the riders race for Honda and Kawasaki and Yamaha and the KTM group and Suzuki, but that's not actually how it works. For the most part, the factory riders are actually employed by the American arms, the American importers of those brands. So the budget for Honda, for Ken Roczen and Chase Sexton, just to take 2 riders for example, is really to race in America and to win championships and races in America. It is not global Honda. Obviously, there is some wiggle room in between. These riders do occasionally go to Motocross of Nations or Paris Supercross or the Ossex Open. We've seen them do off-season events, and the team does stretch the budget a little bit to help the rider make some money or just race for his country. But for the most part, factory teams in America are only interested in racing in America. And it's not much of a secret that at one point, because of the FIM sanction that they had at the time, the old promoters at Feld did pursue the idea of global expansion and having more races overseas. And I believe the teams weren't excited about that. Now, it might seem odd because you would think, okay, isn't Honda, again, to use them as an example, going to get more exposure globally if they race in more cities around the world than just racing in the United States? Maybe. But to understand why that's not the direction they want to go, you have to understand why these teams race and how fortunate we are that they race the way they do. The factory teams are not shopping with a list of exposure, attendance numbers, what cities we visit, TV ratings. They're not shopping to pick what series based on that. This is intrinsic, baked into the fiber of the factory teams and the manufacturers to say, we pursue the AMA Supercross and AMA Motocross titles in America, and then we have European arms that pursue the FIM World Motocross or MXGP Championship. That's it. That's just what they do. I don't believe they're looking at metrics every year on exposure to determine what series they want to race. It's just what they do. And that's actually good, because if you look at most motorsports, they have not had, and I've mentioned this on videos before, the stability that this sport has had, where the same factory teams have been here, like literally here at Daytona, for more than 50 years. Most motorsports would love to have factories and manufacturers stay involved every year. We never have a question. Is Kawasaki even going to race this year? It's never even in question. It's what they do. I don't believe they're doing it for profit. I don't even believe they could line up bike sales and say this justifies the amount of money we're spending to race AMA Supercross and AMA Motocross. We are lucky that motorcycle manufacturers consider racing intrinsic to the product, and they have brand pride, and they just want to win titles, and they want to win it against their competitors that they know will be in the same series. And that's why they always go AMA and FIM. So it's a good move for that World Supercross series to get FIM sanctioning, but obviously if you want the top Supercross riders in the world, you're going to have to talk to some of the riders that race here in AMA Supercross, the top guys, Cooper Webbs, Eli Tomac, Ken Roxon's top 3 in points last year, just to name a few names. It's not going to be as easy as it might seem on the outside to convince riders like that to race around the world, because again, their factories are paying them to win these titles here in the United States. Now, if you can't get the teams to immediately sign on, and they must have known that that wasn't going to happen automatically, there's another thing you could try to do to shift or tilt the balance in your favor, and that is just offer a lot of budget for the teams and riders, and that's what they announced this week. $50 million over 5 years will be budgeted to give teams to operate at these international races. That's $10 million per year, and it's a totally different model. They are not going with the traditional factory model that we see here traditionally in this sport. They want privately owned teams. And from talking to those guys at the World Supercross behind the scenes, the real vision is to have teams and riders with a little more of an international base. We generally have American riders, French riders, and Australian riders here, and a few exceptions. Obviously, we've had, Max Anstey's from England, for example, Ken Roxon's from Germany. But the traditional Supercross powers are Australia, France, and the United States. I think they want to be even more global than that, to have more fast riders in more countries, and maybe even team ownership in those countries as well. So they are trying to have a different model, a franchise-type model. And NASCAR actually moved in the franchise model direction a couple of years ago, where the team owners can say, hey, there's only a few of us that are even allowed to possess these franchises which allow us to race. And that's some added value for our team right there. Even if we want to get out of the sport, we could still sell that franchise and potentially make money, which is how the stick and ball sports work here, by the way. That's why somebody owns the Dallas Cowboys. They're willing to invest in their team because they know if things go sideways, they can always sell the team and try to make that money back. So that is the model they're putting out. We're going to have private, franchised teams, and we're going to give you a budget. It's $10 million. They want to have 10 teams, I think, racing in both classes. So really, if you look at $10 million, it sounds like a ton of money. $50 million sounds like a lot of money. I'm not laughing that off at all. But at the same time, when you divvy it up by 10 teams and $10 million per year, it's money. There's no doubt about it. That's $1 million per team. That's legit. But it's not like the teams out here aren't spending money. In fact, if you were to total up the budget being spent by Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and the KTM group, it probably comes to $10 million a year, maybe more. So at first blush, that $50 million seemed like an impressive number, and it definitely is. I'm not laughing off $50 million, and I know you're not either. But at the same time, we have to realize that there's about that much money already being spent on the factory side. We don't know exactly how much the riders get paid. They never disclose that. We don't know what the title and win bonuses are, but they are healthy. The riders at the top level are making really good money. Now, there's definitely a carve-out. We know riders like Justin Brayton have done very well, racing internationally, only racing Supercross, not racing motocross. And I believe there's more of a model for that these days than there was back in the late 90s when this series tried to do the same type of thing, right? Riders can get media exposure in a better variety of ways than they could in 1999. So I believe there is a carve-out for some riders to maybe get access to decent parts, decent bikes, take that $1 million, fund a team with that, maybe get a sponsor to put it over the top. But I would also think this World Series wants to have big names as well. And I think that's the big question. And when everybody saw the press release this week that said $50 million, and by the way, they're saying the purse, I believe, is $250,000 per race, I think the first blush move is, oh, well, a superstar guy like Ken Roczen is going to go there. The checks, the money is going to be huge. It is a good amount of money. But when you break it down to $10 million a year by 10 teams, and we don't know if any funding or any support will be coming from the factories, who are already paying the riders a lot of money, if you remove that factory money from the equation, suddenly it's not as much of a slam dunk monetarily as it seems. There's going to need to be some proof of concept. You know, what are the riders getting out of this series? How can they shop sponsors based on that? And can they recoup some of the money there? And there's one other thing that I absolutely have to mention here. They have not announced an actual schedule, but they will be racing World Supercross at the end of 2022. They're saying essentially September through November. And it will be, you could use it as almost like a feeder series to get ready for Anaheim next year. But they have said already that they will expand in 2023 and they will start racing in June. We already know probably what the racing calendar is going to look like in 2023. There's going to be Lucas Oil Pro Motocross in 2023. So I just want to be completely clear here. Obviously, I'm the television announcer for Lucas Oil Pro Motocross. I'll try to be as objective as I can. But this series essentially saying in 2023 that they're going to run at the same time as AMA Motocross. That's going to be a problem. That's going to lead to a real decision point for racers and teams, and that's where this thing is really going to get interesting. So if you're asking me to predict where it's going to go in the future, obviously I can't do that. We probably really won't know until next summer. But I can tell you this. The seed money, the franchise model, I believe it was smart on these promoters to try to do things different than the way it's being done right now. That was probably their only chance to even have a shot at this. And maybe there is private owners that want to race for a world championship, that want to spend some money or take some of that money and defray their cost to do this. But once you take the factory money out, and I do not believe that the factories have a huge appetite for going racing internationally. It's just not what they do. It's not what they've ever done. Now we have to see how the removal of the factory support, but the inclusion of the $10 million per year of support for the teams and maybe some potential sponsorships, we'll have to see if those things even out. Like I said, full awareness, I work for Lucas Oil Pro Motocross. I do TV. I work for RacerX. That's a sister company of us, MX Sports Pro Racing, who runs those races. So I'm just trying to get all my biases there out front, but still try to give you the news as objectively as possible. What this really probably will come down to, wherever they race, they're going to hold a race. Whatever it's going to be is wherever it's going to be. The big question everybody has is who is going to race it? And that is a lot more complicated than just saying we have a big purse and $50 million on the line. A lot of it comes down to the traditional factory model that we're lucky to have, because it's been here 50 years and that's what keeps these races going over and over. We never have to question if a team is going to show up. But it leads to some interesting questions and storylines over the next probably 15, 16 months for World Supercross. We'll see how it turns out. I'm just fleshing out the details here, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to come. A lot of people very interested in this topic. We'll see how it turns out.